Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I'll Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And welcome to the second part of the two-parter, accidental two-parter, 100%,
right.
That we did with Bridget Todd, great friend of the show, about Hugh Hefner and the legacy of Hugh Hefner. We just got going, and there was a lot to say.
So much to say.
Yeah, so we had to split it up. Go listen to part one if you haven't already.
It may be confusing if you don't.
It might be. But then come back.
And just kind of like the last one, if you did listen to the part one of this accidental part two that I'm so infamous for, of the legacy of Hugh Hefner, content warning for all the things. We are going to talk about examples of sexual assault, rape, drug abuse, soliciting, trafficking, death, murder, like all the things. It is all up in here. It is as gruesome as you think. It is pretty horrifying. Not to discourage you, but to let you know what's coming up. Of course, we're going to have a pretty detailed conversation about some of the implications this does leave behind. So,
in the last episode, we were deep in a conversation about Hugh Hefner and Playboy and the exploitation and trafficking and abuse that was happening there and how controlling so much of it was, and how the PR machine really did a great job at hiding it or repackaging it, making it look really nice. So we are going to jump in right where we left off and dig into that a little bit more.
Some of the most disturbing stuff that I recall from these memoirs is what it was like to be sexual with Hugh, and what it was like as one of his girlfriends in the house. The ways in which you had to mold yourself to this very specific version of a woman's sexuality that is being dictated by Hugh and Hugh alone is wild. Probably the most shocking thing that haunts me, to this day it haunts me, is the revelation that during these orgies, rather than using lubricant, like a water-based lube that you buy from the store, KY jelly, Hugh Hefner insisted on using baby oil. If you have a vagina, you know that scented baby oil in your vagina is the most horrific thing I can imagine. So these women would be getting regular vaginal infections while having to have sex with Hugh Hefner nightly. They pleaded with the woman who was sort of in charge of doing his bidding, please, let us just use regular lube. We're all getting vaginal infections and we're all having sex constantly. And they would sometimes try to switch it out. They would put lube in the baby oil bottle, but somehow Hugh always knew. And that's what I'm saying. You are so committed to this very specific visualization of what this sexual fantasy is like that you don't even care that it is preventing you from being able to actually have sex, because the women will always have vaginal infections. Crystal in her memoir talks about how it got so bad that she would have anal sex with him when it was her night to have sex with him, because it was that was a million times better than just getting a bad vaginal infection from this baby oil in my vagina.
Oh my God. It just sounds like, again, this is just control. This has nothing to do with actual pleasure or any of that for him. This doesn't really change much from a good lubricant versus baby oil. That this is just about, I want this because I said this. Nothing can change this. And again, that's a form of control and abuse that happens so often within relationships, which, by the way, even for interviews, and I think these things were coming out a lot before these documentaries and memoirs, that people just randomly, we got $1,000 a week. We had to go ask for it, and we knew when we asked for it, it meant that he's going to give us a chart and rating, and that we couldn't leave. If we left, we had to have people with us, obviously, but he gave us everything. He gave me a car, he gave me a dog, and we had a salon for a little while until we abused it, I guess. But people were normal. This is okay.
This is normal.
That's what you agreed with, right?
Normal
to
vibe.
Be at the mansion. And not anybody saying, that's not cold. That's a literal ring. Like, what is happening? This is the most controlling tactic that if we saw that in our friends' relationship, that we'd be like, you're going to get murdered. You need to leave.
Yeah. That's one of the things I keep getting hung up on about this is that we as a society have co-signed on this is okay by being like, oh, well, he did these other things, where it's, women so long have been valued on their body, their desirability, all of that stuff. Here's where you can make money, but let's like paint it real nice. And one of the things that I think about a lot is Hugh started to use feminism. Hugh Hefner started to use feminism to be like, see, it's all good for the women here because of feminism. This was happening at the time of the sexual revolution, the second wave feminism of the 70s. And there was this backlash against it. But then it's almost horrifyingly amazing how well the PR of Playboy did at turning it into, well, we've seen the sexual revolution. You ladies just want to have sex, right? Here you go. Now we get like a feminist stamp of approval, which is wild.
You ladies want reoccurring vaginal infections, right?
Right. This is liberation. Liberation. I mean, they really wanted to pretend like as long as you're not in the kitchen and raising children, this is feminist, which is kind of that big conversation of what was kind of wrong with feminism at that point in time, and being like, this is not all feminism. This is not what we were saying when we said equality. Not to be like, just because you give us you pay us to not have children and to not have, for some of us, and not be in the house and have a job that is atypical. And I'm quoting jobs, or doing things where I can show something proudly where my, other people would be ashamed of. This is not necessarily what we're talking about in feminism. There was an article with New Statesman talking about his co-opting of feminism for his empire. And it says, if you ask Hugh Hefner, he'll tell you he was a feminist before there was such a thing as feminism. And again, it's just one of those narcissistic things where like, I did this before you. Hey, women, I saved you. You're welcome.
And also, is he saying he was doing this before women like Mary Wollstonecraft? Like, what does that even mean? That's
right.
Like just not true. There's no way that's true. Like, you didn't start the feminist movement, my guy. Like, you just didn't.
This is not your thing. This is not you. And they continued. This week, Cosmopolitan republished Hef's love letter to himself, arguing that feminism was its own worst enemy. So we're guessing this is around the time they're like, yo, this is not feminism. Shh. Playboy being the true source of women's liberation. Everybody, he writes, if they got their head on straight, wants to be a sexual object. This piece was originally published in 2007, but Hef's been making the same argument since the 1960s. And in fact, the magazine did promote their own version of women's lib back then, supporting reproductive rights and, of course, sexual liberation. The Playboy Foundation even donated generously to abortion rights organizations and the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, to fund daycare centers. Longtime senior editor Nat Lehrman said the magazine, quote, came out on these important feminist issues before feminists had figured out what their issues were.
Oh, wow. Just to know, I do have to say, we talked about Playboy in our book because...
Yes.
They, in part, helped with the putting together of rape kits, which is something that we must live with, and I don't know what to do about. I don't know what to do about it. But yes.
But in that same article, they do kind of call it out and say, claiming to support women's rights while simultaneously insisting on our objectification was unconvincing for the second wave. But the times, they are changing, and the kind of feminism presented to today's liberal doesn't seem so far off from the magazine's ethos. In an era that ascribes empowerment to everything from breast implants to nude selfies to pole dancing classes, and when the hottest conversation of 2014 was Beyonce's feminism, it only makes sense that the magazine would double down on their efforts to capitalize on the movement. Playboy's existence relies on the notion of women as sexually liberated proponents of free love. As such, the introduction of the birth control pill in America was deeply connected to not only women's liberation, but to the sexual revolution. Women could now have sex like men, no strings attached. Playboy was crafting a version of a women's lib that was, in the end, still male-centered. Women were permitted to be sexual, but within the confines of a one-dimensional view of sexuality that had to, in the end, satisfy men. So there's so many points to this because and you and I have talked about this repeatedly, how to the point that Bumble fumbled their thing. We just recently had an episode about how, say, chastity's not going to be the thing. Y'all are not going to stick to that. Come on, type of thing to come after women who have decided to stop having sex or vow celibacy or whatever, or women who are just asexual that had come into a criticism of that being asexual or vowing celibacy is also almost anti-feminist in some certain realms. Like now that we have our sexual liberation to go backwards, quote unquote, and not having sex, that extreme version, which is like, no, but we're talking about choice here, which is so often gets left off the table in conversation. And in this level of like, yes, they played so hard up on it that they shame you for not being okay with it.
Yes. It's the damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you're a woman, if you have sex, you're a slut. We're not going to believe you if you say you've come forward about Hugh Hefner. If you don't have sex, then you're a prude. And Hugh Hefner wouldn't want you anyway. And they say that like it's a threat. But unfortunately, we are taught like sexual desirability is a thing. And you should want it. Not you should want, but you feel like you should. And I've spoken about that, my experience with that too. But it is so bizarre to me that when we're having this conversation, it's just like we're trying to make ourselves feel better about rape culture. That's just what it feels like to me, is that we're trying to make ourselves feel better about the fact that women are still mostly judged on their body and their youth and their desirability towards men. And Hugh Hefner's a good guy, so you should go with it. And here's all these examples as to why we can feel okay about it. That's the vibe it's giving me.
Right. I think the lean in, that, again, I have to say this again about corporations anyway, in general, the way they co-opt things for capitalism. Like in general, whether it's the queer movement, LGBTQ month, or whether it's like Black History Month, whether it's Women's Month, they do things for name only in order to gain more power. And this sexual liberation was a reach for power.
And it's no coincidence that they are the ones financially benefiting from it. So it's like convincing us to be super cool with our own exploitation and being a cog in this machine of rape culture. They cash a check from that.
Right.
And so it's like it's just exploitation the whole way down.
Right. I did find the interesting conversation about Gloria Steinem going undercover as a bunny. And she talked about her experience and how immediately from jump, she was like, yeah, this is not good. Yeah, the costumes are bad. I'm gawked at. The first thing I was told, the first thing someone yelled at me as I walked into the club was, bunny, bunny, come here. By men, of course. And then one of the things that they touted, and they didn't really talk much about this part in the documentary, I don't know if you had any in your memoirs, that yes, they actually got pretty good pay. So I think they were paid the equivalent, like $200 to $300 a week, which would equal out to be about $1,700 to $2,600, I guess, today in its value. I don't know if that's true or not. But the amount that they had to pay back to the club for the upkeep actually took home a lot less. They had to pay for their own shoes. They had to pay for any mending of their costume. They had to pay for like any appearance upkeep, the nylons, their stockings or pantyhose. whatever, tights now. I don't know. He's been calling so many things. Their makeup, all of the different things, their like standards of beauty. So whether that's getting facials or nails done or hair done or whatever, like they had to upkeep, because if they did not upkeep those things, they were done. They would be demoted and moved around. They did talk about the fact that the costumes, if you did not fit into their costumes, you had demotions and you were suspended until you could. So at one point, a woman came in. She talked about the fact that they were like, you look cute, but you need to lose 10 pounds by next Monday to get into the costume, or you're not going to be here.
It's like not
next
possible.
Monday?
It's like not
I don't even know when the Monday is, and it doesn't matter.
I know.
I mean, if it was like on Monday, next Monday, I have to assume it's 7 days.
Right.
I don't think that's possible.
It was a short time, obviously. Like, no matter what, the longest she had was like 10 days, right? Like, it was absurd. And like, they made sure that was the point. They were talking about how their shoes were so tight or small that they would take their feet, bloody feet, put it into their toilet and flush the commode repeatedly to get cold water and get the swelling down, so that they could fit back into their shoes and go back out. They had the bunny bend. Did you read about this at all?
No.
Because the corset is so tight, but you had to, one of them showed an example where they're facing away from the table. They're slightly cocked to the side, but they have to dip, lean back a little bit with the drink in their hand all the way down, and then put it on the table as if you're like a contortionist, but never facing the table. It was the most absurd thing that I ever heard in my life. I was like, that looks so like, and she was an older woman showing, and I was like, nah, I can't do that today.
That's bizarre. Yeah, that's something that really strikes me about the memoirs of some of the more recent women from Girls Next Door. How strange some of the stuff is. Like, being in this orbit, some of the expectations are just bizarre and arcane and specific, and like a really weird, difficult thing to have to maintain and have your financial livelihood kind of depend on.
Right. But not only that, this level of like, so they touted again that level of like, they protect the women. So, we saw in that article how they would kick people out if they did these things, if they asked for these things, if they touched the bunnies. Apparently that was they talked about that rule. Do not touch the bunnies. If you touch the bunnies, you're kicked out. You cannot hack up. And the only way you can get into the club was like having a key or a key ring specifically. And like, that's how you get in, and you get the drinks and all these great things. Is a big show. You're someone if you got these things. But if you touch the bunnies, you're out. But there was a twofold where, that happened in the club. The minute they were outside of that club, it was done. They had no security. They had no one follow out. Even if the women reported that they were being stalked by someone or that someone was coming after them, they did not care. They were like, literally someone who was a bunny mother, who essentially like was the boss or manager, but you have to give them a cute name, bunny mother, of course, was told by several women that they were being followed, they were being stalked, they were afraid for their lives, they were afraid that they were going to get kidnapped, they were afraid they were going to be assaulted. And when she would tell the security team, they were like, it's not our problem outside of the club. They're big girls, they can handle themselves. Literally being told that. And she's like, what? So they would try to write these incidents about what was happening. Some of the people in the documentary. But on top of that, there was another level of being in the club that was a card. So think like gold card or like one of those metal cards, in which they were given unlimited access and they could do whatever the they wanted, and they did. Now, they would never coerce the women necessarily, but they were encouraged to flirt a lot and take it as you will type of conversations. And when incidents would happen, instead of helping, giving therapy, protecting, women were fired, and they had what they called the cleanup crew to come and fix the situation. So whether it's to like make sure to hush people up or to put it under the radar because they did not need negative things about their clubs or any of the people. They talked about one of the hosts of the Soul Train taking a woman, kidnapping her and locking her up in his room. And the only way she was able to escape was she had called them and she was able to get out, I think her and another person. But he was still allowed at the club. He was never revoked because he was so high in the level.
Yeah. I mean, that's just such a level of disposable,
Right.
how we see women as disposable. Once you age out, once you can't do this move, once you're not desirable anymore, you're just not important to us other than the money that you can make us.
Right. If you've been used up
Yeah.
and you're going to cause us trouble. And this is, again, like I want to vomit just saying those words, but those are the terms that go through. And if you're going to cause us money, give us a loss of money, you're nothing to us. Goodbye.
When Kendra on Girls Next Door asked to be paid to be on the show, they were like, we're not going to pay you. You're all replaceable and disposable. And that idea of replaceability, that there's, a bunch of women who would kill to be here that'll take your spot like that if you complain or cause us trouble, how much that was used to keep the whole thing going. Like, it's so interesting hearing you describe what it was like in these clubs in the 60s and 70s and how that same thing was being used in the 90s and 2000s to continue to silence and keep these women doing what they wanted.
Right. Yeah, there were some other stories that I was just like, my God, like some of the things where like people were actually arrested, but again, the women were just fired and everybody was told to be quiet. And no one knew about it. Even the people who worked in the same clubs that would hear like legends of things and be like, what? I didn't know this. What is happening? And then the other to this is, to me, and I find this interesting because I'm sure you caught up on this in the memoirs. If whatever reason Hugh Hefner lost control of a person, for the next round of relationships, he upped the ante. Like he would do 10 times more. Because I remember the Shannon twins talking about the fact that she was like, okay, when we came in, Holly would talk about her experiences. And then when the Shannon twins come in, would be like, oh yeah, we couldn't do that anymore. They wouldn't let us have that because it caused for Holly to be able to leave or Kendra to be able to leave. And so Hugh Hefner would twist that up so that it would be harder and harder for people to leave.
Yeah, and the way, yes, and the way that surveillance was used, like there's only one phone and it's in the hall, so you can't have any kind of private conversation. So it's like, again, these are not things that are happening in a living situation where people are there completely willingly. I'm sorry, they're just not.
Right.
Like nobody surveils my phone calls other than the U.S. government, I bet. Certainly not the person that I meant to be in a relationship with. That is not normal. And we were like, all watching that on TV, like, oh, this is great. Like, yeah, totally wholesome, normal stuff.
It was honestly baffling to go through in these conversations because obviously I'm bouncing back and forth to his empire and what his empire was doing, which he still like had heavy hand in. So when it came to like the Playboy clubs, yes, he had underlings who did what he wanted without him necessarily coming through and being in the front, the face of it. But then we have what's happening with the mansion with things like Girls Next Door and the girlfriends and the wives and the situations where he is catering or he is creating this chaos and is the face of this chaos. Like that's like obviously separate, but both. But this entity of what the level of power is, because it's almost more ominous to me to hear these stories about the Playboy clubs and things that would happen. And they literally like organized crime level of covering things up in order to protect this man. And that was a conversation that was said, almost even those who were advocating for Hugh Hefner specifically, was like, he didn't know, but they were protecting him. Like this level.
But that's my thing. It's like, I understand that what's happening in the clubs, Hugh Hefner, there's an understanding that he is not personally dictating those policies and all of that happening. But it's obviously related when you look at how similar it is to how the spheres that he did have a lot of control over, his own domestic sphere. And people who would say like, oh, well, he didn't know that was happening. Then what is your explanation for his own home life that he maintained and then hired people to make sure that it was run to his liking? And I just can't see those two things as unrelated. Like, there happened to have been coercive, exploitative, possibly illegal behavior happening here, but he had nothing to do with that. However, here's some similar behavior happening decades later in his domestic sphere that was very similar. Obviously, there's a like a relationship between those two spheres.
You would think it'd be easily like, oh yeah, connect the dots. But the people who want to advocate for him so fiercely refuse to look at those connections. They're like, no, that's not him. They're just trying to pin him that way as to be a bad guy.
Oh, I get this so deeply. I honestly, like, this might sound weird, but I feel for those people who really feel they need to uphold and defend Hugh Hefner. You know, I'm having the same conversation right now with a lot of people that I love and respect around Diddy. I think there is something in our culture where if you have to actually look at what this person did and represented and what you were complicit in or thought was cool or whatever, the work is so hard,
right,
and the revelation is so deep that it almost forces you to knee jerk be like, he would never do that, and if he did do it, they wanted it or something like that. Like I think back to this conversation that one of the Cosby survivors said, a Black woman, and she was one of the first Black women Cosby survivors to come out on the record and say what he did to her. And she was having a conversation with a Black man, and this man came to her and was like, "Sister, is it true?" And she was like, "I'm so sorry, but yes, it is." Like, how cruelly we were lied to, how cruelly we were taken advantage of. And I get it. I get that peeling back the layers of lies that you believed, that you felt empowered by, is difficult work. And I can understand why in the face of that work, you would be like, no, I can't face that. That's too hard. Right. I must defend this institution. Because it would mean looking at all the times that, like, people that you admired or respected played into this. All the times that you yourself played into it. Like I really do have empathy for how hard it is to look at these situations and see them for what they are.
Right.
But like, that's the trip of living in our society. Like, you have to be willing to come to the table and see things clearly and have those tough conversations and do that work.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest, because I did not realize, and I don't know why I did not make this connection, that several of the cases and the allegations toward Bill Cosby originated from the Playboy Mansion. That I was like, because we had one survivor actually speak about it and went into really sad detail about what happened specifically with him. And this level of, this is the other part of this conversation, which is, again, a whole other episode, in that, yes, the likelihood of, because several of the people that they talked about and accused out loud, named within the Playboy Mansion, were Black men. Mm-hmm. Again, we had the Soul Train, I cannot remember his name, host at that point.
Don Cornelius? He was the main, he was the main Soul Train host.
And then the football player, and then Bill Cosby. And I think the other one was finally Roman Polanski. And which was like, he's still technically, isn't he still out and about? Like, he ran away, right?
Yeah.
He ran his way.
He's in Europe.
And he won an award.
And, like, literally, don't even get me started about that motherfucker, because literally celebrities to this day in 2024 will go out of their way to be like, well, his family was killed in the Holocaust, and did he really do anything wrong? Like, I am so sorry. People that you like and respect are on the record. Like, Whoopi Goldberg was like, well, it wasn't a rape. Like, to this day, celebrities go out of their way to defend him, and it makes me want to scream.
Right.
No, like, in 2024, keep it to yourself.
Yeah,
if that's really how you feel,
Stop talking.
Keep it to yourself.
Stop talking. Why are you, well, just keep talking so I can avoid you for the rest of my life and know never to talk to you or look at you ever again.
And not have my kids around your ass.
Yeah, no, I know. Every time I see you, I know, I know who you are. I see who you are. But yeah, no, like, this is that bigger conversation, is like, they are more likely to separate. And again, because I didn't quite grasp it, I'm like, it's kind of a prime example. If Hugh Hefner was kept protected instead of being held liable for what was happening at the parties that he held, for the girls that he is supposed to be responsible for. And I say responsible for, they were his employees, people he's supposed to be protecting, like all of these things. And he came out with nothing. Like, I really did not figure this stuff out with that case of like, oh my God, all these things are awful. This is like, all these things. Even with the mention of it, I was like, he came out unscathed.
Yeah. And I want to say something about Cosby, because, and I don't want to derail the conversation, but Cosby was a known entity to the Playboy Club and Playboy parties, right? This was when he was making family-friendly comedy and, like, becoming sort of America's dad. Like, when I think about the way that Girls Next Door was sort of sold as wholesome and kind of family-friendly, squeaky clean, I keep thinking about Cosby, who his public image was squeaky clean, wholesome, America's dad, blah, 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 while he was going to these Playboy parties. Like, how much it benefits men and allows for men to build up these ideas about them in public that don't square with who they actually are in reality. And it kind of allows them to sort of do this in plain sight, right? Like, oh, I'm a wholesome guy, but I'm going to the Playboy club every night and like sexually assaulting people regularly.
Right.
You know, it's like, and I guess this whole conversation just goes back to the way that like PR and media and doing good things sometimes goes back to creating this dynamic where men get to do whatever they want and people don't ask about it. Like there's like the dynamic where it's like, well, don't tarnish his legacy. And it's like, well, I'm not the one who told him to show up at the Playboy Club. That was him. So like, why can't that be part of his legacy?
Like that is his legacy. Like point blank, if he did it, if he's known for it, if he has been doing things that have like literally destroyed other lives, that's his legacy. That is a part of his legacy, and it should be. It should be worn as proudly as he did it. Like that's that's the end of the conversation. But that's kind of interesting because it does lead to that other love of like Playboy being so wholesome and this conversation about the drugs issue, like within the Playboy mansion and who was providing and who was getting, and the conversation of Quaaludes.
Oh,
which
you mean
I am
thigh
like,
openers?
yes,
As Hugh Hefner referred to them?
The fact that Holly, again, mid-2000s, were like, yeah, he had them in his pocket. They were called he called them thigh openers. We thought, like, she didn't joke about it, but she said it so nonchalantly that I'm wondering if she caught herself saying that. You know? Like, it really was like, he called them his thigh openers. And maybe it's just her monotone voice in general. Like, she doesn't, like, except for when she's, like, annoyed. But, like, it just sounded like, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't he? Type of conversation. That just blew my mind. But on top of that, this is one of the drugs that was used throughout many perpetrators. Like, many of the predators who would use different pills, like, at that point was the drug of choice. For what it seemed to like be like Hollywood, whether it was Weinstein, whether it was like all of them, like blah, but it seemed to be a conversation, and it seemed like commonplace that it just was there. It blows my mind, and in this conversation once again, that no one is equating having to use this as rape, like no one except for those who are violently raped.
And I would also add, so. I mean, I don't even know how to put this. If you're Hugh Hefner and you're in your 80s and you are having sex with women who are 19, and in order to maintain your ability to do that, you are using Quaaludes, and that's how that whole thing is happening, how do you also get to enjoy a public reputation as a real fox in the bedroom, like, oh, like a real, everyone, this is such a fantasy. Like, I guess that's what I'm saying is like, how they've been able to build up this world where it's like, yeah, I'm drugging, all the women have to be drugged to have sex with me, and I'm enjoying a public image as like the world's best lover. Like, those two things can't be possible, except for in this fantasy land that you've built up around yourself.
I don't know. My image of him has never been that he was a good lover. It was just, it was accessible.
Oh my God. In some of these memoirs, like, well, first of all, how good of a, like, if you're getting a vaginal infection, no, that's not sexy. But yeah, he is having sex with these like young, hot women. The women, fun fact, when they would have these orgies, they were allowed, because you might be thinking like, well, maybe the women are having sex with each other and like they're getting something out of it if like Hugh is not performing good. They were only able to have simulated lesbian sex with each other. They could not actually kiss each other or do things to each other, the women. They had to just sort of pretend. So even that is like, yeah, you really wanted to make sure these women got nothing out of this encounter, that it was as humiliating and unpleasant physically as possible.
Yeah. I mean, the young twins, when they were talking, Shannon's, they were talking about their first experience with Hugh Hefner. The way they implied was like, it was demeaning. Like the first thing he did was obviously whatever was his fantasy for what, like, it's just a whole level of like, you just really like decided this is what needs to be.
Yes. And I guess it goes back to what you were saying about like, oh, well, don't women want to be sex objects? And like, isn't this liberation? where, like, when the sex is demeaning and not physically satisfying, it's not like he was like, oh, let's make this about your pleasure. Like, yes, you can be a sex object. So, like, what do you want? Like, what do you like? What are your likes? What do you not like? Let's make sure this is about you. That's not what's going on. And I think there is a world where somebody somewhere could create an empire that maybe truly is about a woman's sexual liberation and pleasure.
Right.
However, one where what the woman wants does not even come up, just can't be it.
Right. Right. And there's no mention of that. I don't even think he talks about it within his magazines, does he?
No.
No,
I mean,
because he has to give the girl next door, and girl next door can have sex, but they can't have sexual desire.
So you're at once made into a sex object, but, like, in a way, unsexed. Because, like,
Right.
you're not talking about your desires or what you want.
Right. And you have to fit our ideas so we can demean you, and we can be the one to not just deflower, but essentially take that from you.
It's only liberation if you're being demeaned, ladies. Remember that.
Right. Oh my God. And there's so much more that we need to be talking about, because honestly, like, it went into a deeper conversation about women apologizing to women and realizing where they failed each other in these documentaries. Like, again, Sonia Theodore came into a point where it's like, I am so sorry to the women that I brought into this. I did not know. I was scared. And I ruined your life. Like, she came in like a full, like, level of conversation, and like, to the point that she felt like she had Stockholm syndrome because she had gone through these things thinking it was okay, came back year after year after year after breaking up with him, having these great relationships, pretending, like, telling everyone how great he was, and then realizing, like, wait, this was trauma, which is such a natural story for everyone. There was one point of the interview, I was telling you about the splits of the documentary, where the journalist is talking to a friend of hers who was a boxer who posed for Playboy. And she was talking about, she could never say the words rape. She could never say any of these things. But she said, I had to give in because they saw me as sexual. I was not for Playboy event. This was for her actual career stuff. But describing an incident where after the fact, she got a lot of for posing for Playboy and being told that she's this now. And she was like, I didn't want to have sex. I told them I didn't want to. This person was married, but, I was a part of this industry. That's what they expected. I was a part of their team. So I just went ahead and gave in. And the reporter was like, oh my God. And they were actual friends. And she's like, you never told me this. You never told me this. And she's like, I wouldn't quite say it's rape. And the friend stopped her. She's like, no, that's rape. You did not want to do this. And like, the woman sat there and was like, the athlete sat there and was like, okay. Like, it kind of that level. But that's what you see playing out as these different women are talking about these incidents of, like, not understanding consent in the first place, not understanding that what was happening was a level of manipulation, and then not understanding that they were a part of the trafficking ring when they were bringing other women in to be a part of this cycle. So this such a big conversation within that. And again, I told about the one woman who was just going after other women, saying, you're just being a gold digger, you knew what you were coming into, which, again, that phrase was said so many times. Like, my heart is racing thinking about it now, because that phrase is like, you knew what we were coming into, they knew what they were going into, they knew what this was about, like, as if to validate what was happening. And it's like, but that wasn't even, like, honestly tore into. That wasn't even opened up to, like, that level of conversation in this documentary, because they really didn't have time, and they didn't have the space and the emotional space to really dig through all of that. Because kind of like reliving the stories and saying it out loud was like, oh, these are the things that happen. But again, like, and there were a couple of accusations of Hugh Hefner forcibly raping women, which hasn't been said previously. And one victim spoke up about what she had gone through. And I think this one hit too close to me, like my own experiences, that I almost like threw up. Like what she was talking about through her own childhood, and then getting to this point with this man who she was told that this was safe, that she was safe, and then being ripped apart, and then everybody ignoring it, and to the point like she went to a higher up who was a woman and was like, oh my God, this happened. She's like, oh, is that all? You're fine. He's not gonna do anything against you. You're fine. Like, he's not gonna be retaliatory, or he's not gonna be mean to you for this. It's fine. And that was what she had to walk away with. But like those level of like, yeah, he has been personally accused of raping women. That needs to be said out loud. Though everybody else wants to dance around this whole like, oh, you know, she had to be talked into a little bit, or oh, we were being paid, or whoa, we knew what we were walking into. Did I like it? Did I want to? No. Did I have to smoke a lot of weed? Sure. But we knew, like, that level, like, that's still coercion. That is still considered a type of rape. That is still against your will. But like true levels of like that higher level of like, yeah, this dude got away with it. This dude got away with it. And in these conversations, again, like the wider range, he may have got like, there's allegations of him being a part of cover-ups of deaths, allegations of cover-ups of drug trafficking, like literally FBI. Like there's this level though, and y'all tell me, like, there's so much of like the anti-hero conversations, especially when it comes to drug use and like almost like organized crime level, that you root for the bad guys. You know what I mean? And still that part of you of like, huh. Like people would take that and credit him as being cool. You know what I mean? Even though the true allegations are so gross.
Yeah, I mean, I think that moving drugs, you might look at that and be like, oh, he really knew how to do what it took to keep the party going. And it's like, well, also moving women as cargo, as sexual cargo, that part is less cool, right?
Like using them as mules.
Yes.
Like not quite cool. This is not the thing. But like, there's the depths of what goes into the story, like the depths of like things that are hidden. So like we also talked about the exploitation that he had taken the tapes, they had taken the extra photos, and like all of not only the tapes of them being taken pictures of, which had been released, to the shock of many of the women, especially like the older women who were told that this would never exist because that medium hadn't existed at that point, or didn't think they needed that at that point, as now being released because Playboy sold it without any of the women consenting nor getting money for it. Once again, and this was not too long ago, but the actual videos made from the security cameras, like from what I gathered, Mickey Garcia and Sonia Theodore actually came together and started trying to petition to find out what was happening or what happened with those videos, because many of them were so petrified that these would be released. And they were told that it is somewhere in the sea. Well, now I'm wondering like if people heard that and are going to try to find it.
Oh, I think so. I mean, something that you said that sticks with me is like, he got away with it. And I feel like where we are now in 2024, I'm happy. Like, I would have said yes. I remember when he died, we saw all the conversations about free speech and racial equity and women's lib and sexual freedom and all of that. And so it does kind of feel like broadly he got away with it. But I am happy that we are in a place now where women's voices are being elevated in this conversation, and that we are actually creating a legacy where maybe he won't get away with it. Maybe we will continue to speak up and continue to listen to people who speak up, and not just be like, oh, well, they knew what they were getting into, they were being paid, and actually have a full accounting of his legacy. And even for people who like Hugh Hefner, which obviously I don't think anybody will be surprised that we probably don't fit into that category, you should be able to contend with his full legacy. And this is all part of that legacy. And so if you want to honor who he was, honor him fully. This is part of that. Even if you love his free speech and love all the other things that he's done, don't just take the good. Take a full accounting of who the man was.
Right. Agreed. And you're right. I think that that's got to be something that we have to remember, is that as long as we keep talking about it and making sure we tell the full story, or at least the full story as we know it, and continue to unfold for the sake of all the survivors, like those who are speaking out, that we support them by making sure that we elevate their voice.
Yes. Well, obviously, we had a lot of thoughts. We had a lot to say. So Bridget, where can the good listeners find you?
Well, you can find me at my podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet, where we are having similar conversations about the legacy of women and technology and digital media.
Well, thank you as always, Bridget, for being here. We love having you. Clearly, we could go on and on and on. So thank you so much for taking the time. And this brings us to the end of our epic conversation on Hugh Hefner. Maybe there will be an epilogue, as we discussed.
Yeah, there's going to be so much more because I honestly forgot one big chunk that honestly, Hugh Hefner's real, like the beginning may have been because he was essentially kind of an incel. Like he may have been essentially an incel because he changed his whole perspective on women and what he had to be in order to get women. So the legend goes, because he was rejected by a girl in his high school to the point that he wrote about her for many years later.
Wow.
And then he changed his whole appearance and his whole his whole personality, essentially, according to old friends. So, yeah, I think there has to be an epilogue because we definitely, even with the 2 hours that we spent in this conversation, there was so much more that we had left out. It's intense.
It's sad how often that is the case of like a guy gets spurned in high school and then becomes the founder of Facebook or what have you.
Right.
That's not exactly what happened there, but similar.
Similar too.
Well, I look forward to and am nervous about the epilogue. It's always great to hang out with Bridget, who was so kind with her time when we kept going and had so much to say. Listeners, if you have any thoughts about this, you can contact us. You can email us at stephanieandmomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.